Here it comes, yeah. Okay. Okay, I think we'll be doing this session on heaven and earth, and so we hope that this will be a blessing for us as we study this subject, and we can learn something from it. Okay, here it goes. Let me just play the yeah. So yeah, heaven and earth, and in this week's Bible study, we're looking at the phrase heaven and earth. Most of us have trouble thinking about the concept of heaven, the way the Bible actually describes it. We tend to imagine it as a beautiful place where we go after we die, but it's so much more than that. Heaven and earth, God's space and human space, were originally united as one. When humanity chose to go their own way, these two spaces were driven apart, but Jesus made a way for the two spaces to be one again. Right now, we can experience the overlap between heaven and earth, but one day, soon we will see the two spaces fully reunited again. As we wait, we are invited by Jesus to live out this prayer. Father, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Wow, that's so good. In this week's study, we'll explore and practice the hope of this reality together. Okay. Now, we'll move to the podcast. Let's listen to this podcast carefully, and then we will move to the video.
This is John at Bible Project. I grew up in a modern evangelical church in the 80s and 90s, and if you were to ask me back then, what is the story of the Bible? I would have said, believe in Jesus so you can go to heaven when you die. And that phrase, going to heaven, was something I said with confidence, even though I didn't really know what it meant to go to a place like heaven. In fact, the most concrete description I was ever given was by someone who said that heaven will be like a never-ending worship service, which, to be honest, for my introverted, inhibited self, felt underwhelming. So it came as a surprise to me, and I found that it comes as a surprise to others as well, that the story of the Bible isn't about going to heaven when you die. The story of the Bible instead is about the union of heaven and earth. The first crack in my mental image of going to heaven came from an author, Randy Alcorn. He lives up here in the Pacific Northwest where I'm from, and he wrote a book called Heaven. I heard him speak at a chapel service in my early 20s, and he showed us budding Bible nerds there how the last few chapters of the Bible are not about going to heaven, but they are about heaven coming to earth, a new earth. The best life on earth is a glimpse of heaven, Randy wrote in his book. I immediately began imagining what a new earth might be like. And I have to admit, my first thought as an avid snowboarder at the time was about the mountain ranges on this new earth, undoubtedly full of endless, deep, powdered slopes. But more importantly than the adventure to be had in the new earth, and I do believe there will be adventure to be had, more importantly is the hope that this new earth will be full of justice.
Oh, you're not able to listen? Hello? Are you all able to hear the video?
Yeah.
Podcast? You can hear the podcast?
Yes.
Yeah, they can all hear. Yeah, okay, sorry. Sanu just said that. Okay, we are going on.
And peace. The valleys, full of abundance. Let yourself imagine a world, this world, but where people use their gifts and resources for self-sacrificial love, where there's enough for everyone, and justice always prevails. Imagine God's kingdom come. When Tim, Mackie, and myself decided to work on this project, making Biblical Theology Explainer videos, the union of heaven and earth, how it was once united, driven apart by our rebellion, and how the story of the Bible is how God is relentlessly working to bring this union back together with us. Jesus told his disciples that there will be a renewal of all things. The word for the renewal that Jesus uses literally means another birth. It'll be like our world, but reborn. It won't be reborn into some fuzzy category that we can't understand. Jesus names ordinary realities in this new creation, like family and fields where we work and homes where we live. But things will also be categorically different. The biggest difference will be that it's a world so permeated with God's own life and love that death will be no more. What happened to Jesus on Easter morning is what God has in store for the whole universe. And in new creation, the power structures will look different. The first will be last, and the last will be first, Jesus said. While we wait for new creation, we still have to deal with evil and death and chaos. And on any given day, evil will prevail. But when Paul reflects on the future hope of this world, he says, the world will be liberated from its bondage to decay. Right now, he says, creation is groaning like a woman in childbirth. New creation is taking its time, being knit together in our midst, even when we can't see it, but we get hints of it, movements on the surface. And one day, it will be pushed forth into life like a newborn baby emerging from the womb. What an incredible metaphor. Jesus taught us to pray, Father, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And so today, let's meditate on these two passages about new creation. Think about what it means that Jesus has begun the rebirth of not just us, but our whole world as well. And then ask for God's reign to come with more reality into our lives, our neighborhoods, our cities.
All right. With this, we will turn to the video. Okay. No, I think any quick reaction before we turn to the video? Any quick reaction? Anything that struck you from the podcast today? Anything that probably struck you? The fact is, anything interesting? Anything little difficult?
No, towards the end. Am I mute? I don't
No, we can hear you. We can hear you.
how to put it.
Go on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
None?
Yeah, go on, go on.
Continue live.
Okay. Yeah. So I think there's some breakdown in the voice.
Like Pastor, we have always been from childhood, we've always been taught like heaven is a place of singing, and you'll like how in the video, in the audio, they said that.
Accepted it to them. Justified.
Who's speaking? Okay.
Yeah, go on, go on. Yeah, I think there's some net lag probably. But yeah, Mary, can you finish what you're saying?
Yeah, so I was just saying that like we've heard from the childhood days, like, from the age of 3, we've heard it's always being told to us like heaven, and like, we'll go to heaven and there we will be worshipping and all of that. But here what they said was it's not about us, it's about the union of heaven and earth.
Correct,
So
correct.
that's
Okay,
like that's something nice.
Yeah, that is something nice. Yeah, correct. Okay, let's move on to the video, and then we'll see.
Pastor, sorry to
Yes,
interrupt.
go ahead.
Is it a spiritual reuniting or physical? I mean, what exactly is it?
Yeah, I think it is definitely a physical renewal because the earth is in decay, it says in Romans, and then it is waiting for the sons of God to be manifested so it can be renewed. It is going through births of labor like a mother.
Okay.
So it will be renewed.
Reuniting also, even physical reuniting of heaven and earth.
Yeah, there'll be a physical, it will be a renewal and earth and heaven coming together and new one reality will be formed,
Yes.
a glorious reality.
Okay.
That's
Yes.
so yes, it will be a physical reality.
Okay.
Just as we are going to have physical bodies, renewed
Yes.
physical bodies, the
Yes.
same matter, everything will be. Yes.
Okay, yes. Thank you.
All right. Okay, now let's look at the video.
So in the Bible, the ideas of heaven and earth are ways of talking about God's space and our space.
So I understand our space really well. We live here. There's trees, rivers, mountains. But my understanding of God's space gets a little fuzzy.
And what we do get in the Bible are images trying to help us grasp God's space, which is basically inconceivable to us.
So these are two very different types of spaces.
Yes, they're different in their nature, but here's what's really interesting is that in the Bible, these are not always separate spaces. So think of heaven and earth as like different dimensions that can overlap in the same exact space.
So we talk a lot about going to heaven after we die, but this idea of heaven and earth overlapping, we don't talk a lot about that.
Which is kind of crazy because the union of heaven and earth is what the story of the Bible is all about. How they were once fully united and then driven apart, and about how God is bringing them back together once again.
So let's go back to the beginning, where heaven and earth, they're completely overlapping.
Yeah, this is what the Bible's description of the Garden of Eden is all about. It's a place where God and humanity dwelt together perfectly, no separation, and humans then partner with God in building a flourishing, beautiful world and so on.
But as humans, we wanted to do things a different way. We wanted God out, and we wanted to create a world apart from him.
Yeah, so we have these two spaces now. And the Bible actually uses lots of different kinds of words and phrases to refer to these two spaces to make a clear distinction.
So you've said that these spaces can overlap, though. So explain how that works.
Yeah, this is where we have to start talking about temples. Because in the biblical world, you experience God's presence by going to a temple. That's where heaven and earth overlap.
Now, there are two types of temples described in the Bible. One is a tabernacle, basically a tent that was built by Moses. And the other was this massive building made by Solomon.
And these temples were decorated with fruit trees and flowers and images of angels and all kinds of gold and jewels and so on. And these are designed to make you feel like you're going back to the garden. And at the center of the temple was a place called the Holy of Holies, which was like the hot spot of God's presence.
Now we can go and be with God again.
But not so fast, because the temple also creates a problem. So God's space is full of his presence and goodness and justice and beauty, but human space is full of sin and injustice and the ugliness that results.
So how do these spaces overlap if they're so different and they're in conflict with each other?
This was resolved through animal sacrifice.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. What do animal sacrifices have to do with this?
Yeah, the idea is this. Animal sacrifices, somehow they absorb the sin when the animal dies in your place. And it creates a clean space, so to speak, where you are now free to enter into the temple and be in God's presence.
Okay, so if I'm an Israelite and I live in Jerusalem, I might be able to be in God's presence. But you said the story of the Bible is all of heaven and earth reuniting.
Right. So we have to keep going in the story where we come to Jesus in the New Testament. And in the Gospel of John, we hear this claim that God became human in Jesus and made his dwelling among us. Now, this word dwelling is really curious. It means he set up a tabernacle among us. And so what John is claiming right here is that Jesus is a temple. He is now the place where heaven and earth overlap.
What's interesting about Jesus is that he isn't staying in this safe, clean space. He's running around, hanging out with sinners. He's healing people of their sicknesses and forgiving people of their sins.
He's basically creating little pockets of heaven where people can be in God's presence, but he's doing it out there in the middle of the world of sin and death.
And he keeps telling everyone that the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
And he even told his followers to pray regularly that God's kingdom come and that his will be done here on earth just as it is in heaven.
But a lot of people are threatened by Jesus and they kill him, which seems to spoil this whole plan to reunite heaven and earth.
But we have to go back to a scene earlier on in Jesus' story where John the Baptist saw Jesus and said, "Behold, this is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world."
So Jesus isn't just talked about as being a temple, he's also talked about as being the temple sacrifice.
Yeah, so the cross is now the place where Jesus absorbs sin to create a clean space that is not limited like animal sacrifices. Jesus' sacrifice has the power to keep spreading and reuniting more and more of heaven and earth.
And this is all really great, but it leaves one big question in my mind, which is, what happens when I die? Don't I just fly over to God's space to be with Jesus?
Yeah, so a few times in the New Testament we learn that Christians will be with Jesus in heaven after they die, but that is not the focus of the Bible story. The focus is on how heaven and earth are being reunited through Jesus and will be completely brought together one day when he returns. So in the book of Revelation, we get this beautiful image of the Garden of Eden, now in the form of a city, coming to end the age of sin and death by redeeming all of human history in a renewed creation. And God's space and human space completely overlap once again.
We believe the best way to understand the Bible is to look at its overall.
Now we just go to the questions here for discussion after seeing the video. Okay, any quick thought? Anybody has any quick thought to share after seeing the video? Any quick reaction that struck you a second time or first time if you've seen it? Okay. All right. Here it comes.
There it is.
So we're going to do this.
Okay. We just look at the scripture and then we will discuss questions. And Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, that you who have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or farms for my name's sake will receive many times as much more and will inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last first." Okay, so this is Jesus is sharing this to his disciples, and that they will sit on a glorious throne and they'll be judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Yeah, and all those who have made sacrifice will get many times as much. Okay, here it comes. The question now, reflection 1. Consider one scenario in your life that is hurting and broken. Okay, what do you think that situation will look like when it is fully reduced? I think this is more for personal reflection, so we should think about it. We all have certain areas of where we feel unfulfilled, where we feel broken, where we feel it's like a dry and barren space. But consider how it will look when it is fully renewed, in the future when we meet with Jesus, when earth and heaven become one and everything becomes glorious. So just think about that for a moment. Okay. Jesus' sacrifice created a clean space where heaven and earth continue to overlap. Consider again that scenario in your life that needs renewal. How can you imitate Jesus in that situation? What can you sacrifice that would allow others to see a little pocket of heaven on earth? Wow, it's amazing. It's not that Jesus is the only one who makes a sacrifice, but we are called to imitate Jesus Christ in also making those kind of sacrifices. Yeah, so how can you imitate Jesus in that situation? Wow, think about that. Yeah, next. Who usually gets to enjoy the first, best, and most powerful scenarios on earth? Who usually has to endure the last, worst, and most vulnerable situations on earth? Yeah, who gets to always enjoy on earth? Any answer? It's quite simple. And who usually always is the last, worst, and most vulnerable situation on earth? Anyone?
Those who have all the assets and all the
Correct. Yeah. Rich people. Rich people are the ones who always enjoy, and the poor, the marginalized, are the ones who always suffer. So read Matthew 19:30. What would it be like when Jesus reduced all things? So it's Matthew 19:30. Yeah. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. So according to Matthew 19:30, the whole thing will change. You know, any examples, any story in the Bible that talks about the last being first? When you talk about the rich people and poor people?
Lazarus and the rich man.
Yes, excellent, Mrs. Ranganavan. Number one Bible student. Very good. Yes, excellent. Very good. Yeah. Romans 8 verses 18 to 22. For I consider that the suffering of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, that the creation itself will also be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. Okay. So the whole creation, the future glory will be so good that our worth, present suffering is not worth comparing to it. And the creation itself is now in a process of decay. But one day it will be renewed like a mother giving birth to a child. A new creation will be formed. Okay. Consider the childbirth metaphor in verse 22. How is the world as we know it like a woman in labor? How is the new heavens and earth like a newborn? Like a newborn. Okay. Now, presently, how do you see the world? How is the world as we know it like a woman in labor? What describes the labor pain of a woman in comparison to the world right now? Can anyone just, yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
The full of pains and anxiety and
full of pains and anxiety. Okay, the world is, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even when you when the woman is expecting the pain and anxiety, what's going to happen now?
Correct.
You know, what's going to happen? What, I mean, it's nothing she can imagine also what will happen, and it's all in God's. So the same thing in this world today. You don't know with this pandemic and all what's going to happen next. Everyone is wondering about that. No?
Correct. Okay.
So uncertain. The life has become uncertain.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Anyone else on the description of woman in labor? How does that parallel with the world today? As we see it, as we know it, what are certain descriptions of the world that suit the phrase a woman in labor? Anyone else? Yeah. Quite simple, quite easy is to basically talk about the stories of war going on in places. There's hunger, there is thirst, people are dying, earthquakes. All this could be something that describes, floods coming in, could be showing that the world is in labor, that it's paining, labor pain. This is what I think. How is the new heaven and earth like a newborn? So it will be completely new. It will be free from all pain and suffering. Correct? That's how we can look at it. Jesus taught us to pray, Father, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Take some time now to ask God to turn our hearts, homes, neighborhoods, and cities into pockets of heaven on earth. Correct? So Jesus taught us to pray, Father, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Take some time now to ask God to turn our hearts, homes, neighborhoods, and cities into pockets of heaven on earth. Yeah. So, okay, this is just an exercise that we need to do. So basically the transformation of our heart, our home, our neighborhoods, and our cities So imagine everything that's wicked and evil and decaying will disappear from our hearts, homes, neighbors, and cities into pockets of heaven on earth.
At this part of the prayer, I always felt why Jesus taught us to say that your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. He means that on earth what is happening now, the same thing will happen in heaven, or
No. The heaven is the powerful reality. The overcoming reality is heaven. Heaven is coming down on earth. Earth is not going up to heaven.
Heaven is coming on heaven. That's all.
Yeah. So heaven will dominate the earth. Heaven will completely transform the earth. Yeah. So heaven and earth will become one reality. There'll be a union. That's what it is saying. We'll look at some more scriptures in the end. Ask God, turn our hearts, homes, neighborhoods, and cities into pockets of heaven on earth. Okay. Yeah. So that's it. I think, yeah, correct. That's probably it that we look at. Yeah. I think now we can just